presentation this afternoon is an introduction, really, an overview of the new licensing regulatory regime for water abstractions and their associated impoundments. So I'll cover some of the need for it, the legislation, the scope, and where we are at in terms of state of play. It's a risk-based regulatory system, so I'll introduce you to what the elements of that is, as well as the processes involved. So just to say, abstractions and associated impoundments, they're kind of a subset of the hydromorphological activities that, as we all are aware, are a significant pressure on our water bodies. So having a control system clearly makes sense. And we want to regulate these activities for the protection and the improvement of our water bodies, but also for the sustainable use of our water. So where is it coming from? Like everything in this conference, it starts mostly with the Water Framework Directive, which requires controls on water abstraction impoundments, including a requirement for a register of abstractions and prior authorization for abstractions and impoundments. So the Water Framework Directive was transposed into the Water Environment Abstractions and Associated Impoundments Act of 2022. And its associated regulations, 3 sets of regulations in 2024. This introduced a registration, licensing, and a control system for water abstractions and their associated impoundments. The system is administered by the EPA, and it came into operation just last year on the 24th of August. So just to consider first what is in scope. What is an abstraction is the removal or diversion of water from our water environment, for example, a river or a lake, or groundwater. An associated impoundment, now these are for the purposes of the abstraction. And this is a structure that's in the water that is maintained for the purpose of the abstraction, and it usually regulates the water level or the flow in the surface water. Not everything is covered by the Act. So one of the obvious ones is that coastal abstractions are not regulated under this legislation. Rainwater harvesting, sometimes common in golf courses, not regulated, and nor is rainwater that collects at the bottom of a quarry. The Act provides for exemptions under Part 3, and it introduces certain categories. These include domestic drinking water supply, abstractions used for firefighting, and temporary abstractions during civil works covered under planning. So if an abstraction falls into one of these categories and operates for less than 8 weeks, and lower than 25, then it is exempt from the regulations. As I said, the EPA being competent authority for the register and licensing and control system, we've updated our website comprehensively with relevant information, guidance materials, and FAQs. So I encourage you to visit our website for the further information after this. The Act sets out many roles and responsibilities, not just for the EPA, but for other organisations, including the local authorities, who are responsible for compliance, inspection, and enforcement of certain abstractions. These are the ones that are not licensed by the EPA. Now, the Act and regulations are quite a tome, so we took the opportunity to kind of summarise them in this document, Principles of Water Abstractions and Associated Impoundment Authorisation. It's on our website, and it summarises the legislation quite easily. And further details are there on roles and responsibilities if you want to get more detail on that. So getting into the meat of it, it's the risk-based regulation, as I said. And the Act applies this graduated approach to the regulation of abstractions, allowing for the licensing regime that it permits, I suppose, proportionality to the level of risk being presented to our waters. It is based on the water volumes, and there's 3 bands broadly. Band 1 is less than 25 cubic meters a day. Band 2 is between 25 and 1,999 cubic meters a day. And then there's Band 3, the over 2,000 cubic meters a day. And this is the licensing threshold. And I'll talk more about each of those bands and what it means in terms of risk. The volume that we are measuring against here is the maximum volume of water being abstracted in any 24 hours. So just to kind of touch on where we're at today, in the graphic there and the photographs on my left-hand side, you can see that we have a lot of abstractions spread throughout the country. And we know from our current register, which was established in 2018, that we have over 1,900 abstractions exceeding the 25 cubic meters a day. By the way, our register is available online. So the abstractions are predominantly for drinking water and roughly account for about 60% of the ones. But every sector is involved, as you can see, from agriculture through to golf courses, through to industry and Uisce Éireann take water. And the register has been a very useful resource to us for contacting our stakeholders and forecasting the scale of work that's ahead of us. Just breaking down the numbers a little bit more, you'll see that there's 315 abstractions that are over 2,000 cubic meters a day. This is the licensing threshold, and these all require a license automatically. And most of the abstractions are drinking water, as you can see by the sector. The 1,600 abstractions there in the 25 to 199 cubic meters a day bracket will be assessed by the agency to determine whether a license is required or not. And that's the risk-based piece coming into place and the proportionality that we will license where the risk is greatest. We do anticipate that quite the majority of those people in that band will not require a license. By source, where are we taking our water from? As it turns out, for the large abstractions, the over 2,000, they're predominantly coming from our surface water. So they've been abstracting from our surface waters. And then in the smaller band 2 category, we have 3/4 of them are abstracting from our groundwaters. So quite a range and a mix. This graphic here overall describes the process flows for the interaction between registration and licensing. So the first thing I guess you say, anything under 25 only is subject to regulations, and I'll just touch on them in a couple more slides. Everything over 2,000 automatically becomes it requires a license. And there in the central part, when we talked about the 25 to 199 cubic meters per day, they undergo an assessment by the EPA to determine if a license is required. It's quite a busy space, and I'll break that down a little bit easier for you. It's in the salmon color there in the middle. The EPA have developed an online module on the Eden system, if those of you that are familiar with it, to allow organizations to register their abstractions or to apply for a license. And again, we have provided a good deal of guidance and instructions on how to help people in making their online applications. There is also obligations for everyone is abstracting waters, and I'll touch on the general binding rules that are applicable to all. So under the regulations, the EPA are charged with setting out how abstractors measure and estimate their abstraction volume, and everyone is obliged to keep records of their abstractions. The EPA is also charged with setting hydrological limits in relation to abstractions. So some of the general binding rules is that an abstraction cannot cause a physical barrier to fish migrating, and it cannot impede sediment movement. So, and all abstractions need to be operated in a way that leakage and other losses are kept to a minimum. The registration process. So while there is 1,900 abstractions already registered, we know that there are others out there that need to be registered and that they're abstracting over 25 cubic meters per day. So the information that's required to register is just set out there in summary. And those that are already on the register are obliged to maintain the details and keep them up to date on the register. And that's all done through our Eden portal again. The agency will be in touch with all of the people on the register in due course to update their details and to comply with the Act. And obviously, if you're planning to start a new abstraction or increase an existing one, you must notify the EPA and you must await the approval of the EPA before you can commence. The register is really important to our work in regulating and promoting sustainable water use. So we encourage that it must be kept up to date and that we're making decisions with the full and most recent information. Abstractions, just to say, there's a couple of things that are nuanced about the register. If you are abstracting water from a river or a groundwater source, you need to register them separately. If you have a number of abstraction points on the same water body, they'll be registered as one. Just a small detail about it. So to touch on what's involved in determining whether you will require a license if you're in that bracket of 25 to 199 cubic meters a day. So the EPA must carry out an assessment, and that assessment, the first assessment it does is a significance assessment there. And this assessment is done in accordance with an EPA methodology to assess the impact of abstractions on water bodies and involves the use of the cube model. The assessment considers whether there's adequate flow and water level is being maintained to support our healthy ecology in the water body. If found to be a significant abstraction, the opinion will be communicated to the abstractor, who will be given an opportunity to comment before a final decision is made by the EPA. So just to go down the lower line, if it's not deemed to be a significant abstraction, there may be an additional assessment that the agency will have to undertake, which is in relation to retrospective EIA or EIA. And an abstraction that does not require a license will be issued a registration number or revised registration number, as the case may be. It's anticipated, as I said, like the vast majority of abstractions in that 25 to 199 cubic meters per day category will not require a license, but there will be a cohort that certainly does. The licensing process. So anyone that requires a license, so those that are over 2,000 cubic meters required a license, need to make an application to for a license. And anyone that has been advised by the agency or informed by the agency that you require a license must apply for a license. So here's a schematic of the licensing process that it undertakes. So it starts with an application form, and the applicant has to publish a notice in a paper and erect a site notice before they make an application. And then, as I said, make that application online to the EPA. There are fees involved. Anything over 2,000, for example, is a fee of €5,000 to make a license application. So the agency then, once we get an application, we will consult our statutory consultee bodies. We will carry out an assessment and consider the application. We will take in submissions. Anyone can make a submission online on any application. So that our job in terms of considering an application is very much looking at the environmental requirements as set out in EU legislation and Irish legislation. So we're looking for compliance with the requirements of the Act and the regulations. And namely, we're looking for compliance with environmental objectives as set out in the Water Framework Directive. That said, certain applications will also be subject to assessment under the Habitats and Birds Directive and the EIA Directive as appropriate. All the application documentations are available on the EPA website. We are open and transparent in our decision making. and we encourage engagement and involvement in the decision making. Once the information is all submitted and we have a complete application, the agency will make a proposed decision within 8 weeks. And that proposed decision can be subject to observation. So anyone, again, can make observations, but it is time locked to 28 days. Again, those considerations are made on the observations made, and the agency will make a final decision whether to grant or refuse to grant a license. At this time, just to say that we have about 14 license applications received on our system, and they're all from Ishgare. We expect to see more applications over the coming months and years, really. As I said, there is 315 in the large cohort that have to be made. So just in conclusion, it's a risk-based regulatory system. It's a new system, and we welcome the risk-based approach to it. It is there not just to transpose the Water Framework Directive, but will aim to protect and enhance our water environment, as well as promote sustainable water use. So that's it. Thank you very much for your attention. And I'll talk to you later.